oftentimes I'll see a couple where maybe only one partner has a history of trauma. When this occurs, it can be confusing and often hard for the non-traumatized partner to really understand what the other person is going through. So in this episode, I thought it would be a good idea to walk through what would be important to help my partner understand about my trauma. And how can we explain it to them in a way that they can begin to really get it? Because oftentimes I see a disconnect where one person gets triggered and their trauma comes up, or they begin to see and shape the relationship and almost reenact their trauma in certain ways, and the other partner just feels like they're paying for their partner's past. And so it can create cycles. It can create a real sense of disconnection. So in this episode, we want to know, how can I help my partner understand my trauma? Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host, and as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, we're going to talk today about if one partner in a relationship has a history of trauma, attachment trauma, relational trauma, how can we help express and explain that at times so that our other partner who may not have a history of that understands, is able to really grasp and get it. Now, I want to say it's important here. We don't want our partner to understand so that it becomes weaponized in the relationship. We don't want that partner to go, oh, well, this is just your trauma coming up, and completely dismiss any and every concern we might have, because that's not where we're heading for this, and that's certainly not helpful to a relationship. So we're not trying to explain things so that our partner can use it against us, but rather we want our partner to have a deep empathy for sometimes the internal battles that we fight when we have past trauma and the ways that they show up in our relationship. So I want to start just by walking through some myths about trauma. These may be myths that your partner has or ways of thinking about your trauma that are inaccurate. I certainly see these myths play out in the general populace and culture at times as well. So I want to really dispel these myths to begin with. The first one is, it's not that bad. Well, first of all, if you've never been through it, then you have no idea whether it's bad or not bad. And telling somebody that it's not that bad is completely dismissing the feelings that they have, the times of disorganization, and the experience they went through. And so saying it's not that bad is easy to stand on the outside and say that. It's something entirely different when we've been through it ourselves. And so the first thing I would say is, even if you've never had official trauma, meaning anything that might look like PTSD, anything that might have been like flashbacks, so on and so forth, you've certainly sustained some hurts, because none of us get out of this life without sustaining some hurts from other people. So think about that and consider, yeah, I've been hurt before, and while that may not be classified as trauma, it hurts, and when I think about it, it still hurts. It still upsets me. Okay, now think about that memory and times it by 10, and you might get an idea of what trauma is a little bit like. So saying it's not that bad is dismissing the experience of that other person, and we don't want to do that. The second thing I see a lot, another myth, is we should just get over it. It's in the past. There's nothing you could do about it. You can't change it. Just get over it. You have to understand that trauma is not a cognitive decision. It doesn't just lie in our left hemisphere, which is the verbal side of our brain, and like a switch that we can just sort of turn on and turn off. It doesn't work like that at all. As a matter of fact, we know that trauma actually resides in the nonverbal part of our brain and is very closely linked to our emotional centers and throughout our body. down our spine into our body. And so saying we should just get over it is completely invalidating, one, the way our brains and bodies work, but two, it completely invalidates that person's experience as if they somehow just lack the willpower to turn it off and move past it. So we never want to say they should just get over it because, one, it doesn't work like that, and two, is very dismissive of what that person has gone through. And there's a reasons that trauma sticks around. There are reasons that trauma stays locked in our body and keeps coming up for us. There's a reason that it's difficult to get over. Not that it's not possible. It's absolutely possible to be able to retrain our brain and rewire it so that we are no longer imprisoned by the trauma, but rather begin to escape that. So it's absolutely possible to do that. And our partners play a role in that. They play a very significant role in helping us get over it. But saying that, well, we should just get over it like we turn on a light or turn off a light is completely insensitive. Another one I hear a lot in the culture is I'm weak or damaged or broken because I have trauma. And while that may feel that way, I don't want to be dismissive that some people absolutely in some moments feel they're broken or damaged or weak, because I can understand where you would be triggered, and in those moments it seems like something's really wrong with you. You are damaged. It always just kills me when I hear patients say that. I'm broken. You need to fix me. Or I'm damaged. You are only damaged in certain places. There are other parts of you that are strong, capable, and confident. And in fact, if you were able to tap into those other parts of you, it would help with those traumatized parts, because you would be able to use the strong, confident, and capable part of you to help heal that broken or damaged part of you. But it's hard to get there, and sometimes it takes outside help, like a therapist. But you are not damaged, you are not broken, and you are not weak as a person as a whole. There may be parts of you that are broken and parts of you that feel damaged. And that, to me, is a significant difference when we start talking about trauma, is that trauma impacts a part of you, but not always the whole of you. There are other parts of you that are strong, capable, competent, that can go out and benefit and impact the world. And so I don't want you to dismiss those sides of yourself and those parts of yourself for just the times when you are sort of swimming in a triggered, traumatized response and think, I'm just so broken. Another thing I hear a lot is, you can't trust anyone anymore. Well, that's not necessarily true, although the way our brain works is that it generalizes. And so when we have broken trust from a person in our life, our brain says that was so hurtful that we want to enlarge this circle. So it's not just that person I can't trust. Maybe it's the entire family I can't trust. And maybe that doesn't feel safe enough either. So let's enlarge the circle. Maybe it's my friends I can't trust either. Maybe it's my colleagues that I shouldn't be able to trust. Okay, now the circle's wide enough that there's nobody inside this circle I can trust, not even me. Because, as we'll talk about here in a moment, one of the things that trauma does is it impacts your ability to trust yourself. And so we can see how fear generalizes. And what we need to do is we need to remind ourselves that, no, you can trust other people. There may be somebody that hurt you, that traumatized you, that you can't trust, but that does not fall under the list of everybody. And the wider that circle, the more we imprison ourselves in our trauma and in the broken trust that has occurred through that makes it difficult to break out of. So I can't trust this person in this particular context, but that doesn't mean that I can can't trust others. I can trust colleagues. I can trust friends I've made as adults. I can trust my partner because they are not the person that hurt me in the past. And finally, one of the things I hear a lot is you'll never be normal again. And again, this is another one of those that just really pains me. It just hurts my heart to hear because you're already normal. Your response to trauma is normal. What happened to you is not normal. What happened to you is abnormal. But your response to that is your body's ability to be able to try to absorb it and deal with it and carry on with life and relationships in the best way possible. So you are normal, and your reaction to trauma is normal. But what happened to you may not be normal. And that's a big distinction there I want to be able to make. Okay, let's move on and let's talk about how do we get our partner to understand the trauma that we may be going through. Well, one of the things they need to understand is the impact it has on our sense of self, on how we view ourselves. And the first one is oftentimes we can have a loss of self-esteem, right? We can become very insecure in certain places or at certain times in our relationship because of our trauma. And so that loss of self-esteem can show up. It can show up in the anxious attachment style by being clingy, by ingratiating ourselves on our partner, by turning up the heat when we feel a sense of disconnection. And certainly because we can misread things in our partner that send us signals that we can skew through a certain lens of low self-esteem where we pick up cues that say we're not wanted, that we don't want to, we're being abandoned or we're being rejected or we can't get the love we need from this person. And so it's really important to know there are times where I'm just feeling insecure because that trauma has come up for me. And in those moments, what I really need is just a sense of reassurance. So loss of self-esteem certainly can be a part. Now, that can be a severe loss of self-esteem where we feel impacted most of the time in our relationship, or it can just be pockets where we feel insecure at times in our relationship and we get triggered. Another way that trauma can impact the sense of self is because through trusting ourselves. Maybe given what happened to us caused us not to trust ourselves like we used to or like we need to. Maybe we don't always trust our feelings. Maybe we find that we need validation outside of ourselves more than being able to say, you know what, I have the information I need. I can trust that this is enough, and I can trust myself to make a decision, to do what is healthy for myself, to trust myself in situations with my partner where if I'm not feeling connected in that moment, I know that there'll be other moments when we'll be reconnected, when we'll feel closer, that this may just be a phase or a context in which I feel disconnected, not necessarily times that this will last forever. So being able to trust ourselves is really impacted and sometimes impaired through our trauma. And finally, certainly emotion dysregulation. I talk quite a bit about this if you've listened to this podcast before, because this is one of the hallmarks of trauma is we can get triggered and we can go into fight or flight, or we can go into sort of freezing and numbness. So I can get triggered, I can move quickly into fight or flight. That might cause me to get anxious and push for connection and reassurance from my partner, or it might cause me to shut down and pull away. But that trigger and those emotions are completely dysregulated in those moments. And so that's certainly another way that trauma can impact how we see ourselves and who we are. Now, how does trauma impact the relationship? Well, first of all, as I've mentioned before, not only can we not trust ourselves, but we can not always trust others. We can misread signals that can bring up that lack of trust in others. And so one of the ways it impacts our relationships is maybe our partner says that they want to spend time with us, but the game is on this afternoon. So yeah, if we did something in the morning, that would be awesome. That would work out perfectly. They really would look forward to going and taking a walk in the morning and maybe then going and getting a little breakfast together. How much fun. But what we hear is, oh, the game is on in the afternoon. Well, if they didn't really want to spend time with us, they wouldn't even mention the game. So they must already be thinking about the game, not about spending time with us together. So it's like all of a sudden we can pick and choose what we hear from our partner that already supports the way we see ourselves or the insecurities we have in our relationship around lack of trust for others. And so we want to be very careful about how we hear our partner and be able to tease apart and recognize, is this something that's coming from me? Is this my trauma playing a role? Or is this something I can actually trust from my partner? Another way that it can really impact our relationship is through hypervigilance. And so we can be very hypervigilant about whether we're going to be hurt, rejected, abandoned, and we can hone in on our partner's tone of voice, their facial expressions, their bodily movements, things that they say, kind of like the example I gave earlier. We can become hypervigilant to any kind of cues that may trigger our trauma. And again, we can widen that circle so wide that we continue to sort of imprison ourselves because we can never get the emotional connection we desire from our partner because we're so hypervigilant about the ways they might hurt us. We never are able to relax and feel safe, not only in our own body, but being able to feel safe in the relationship. As I mentioned before, emotion dysregulation, right? Certainly what our partner says or does or their tone of voice can cause us to get triggered and go into fight or flight or into freeze modes, and we can become very defensive. And when we do that, we can get caught into cycles of disconnection with our partner. So emotion dysregulation certainly can play a role in our relationships through past trauma. And finally, we can reenact our trauma onto our relationships. Now, this is something I don't see a lot of people talking about or writing about, but it absolutely happens, and I see it play out with my couples all the time. So how do we reenact our trauma in our relationships? Well, oftentimes we can do so in three ways. One is we can treat ourselves the way we were treated that caused the trauma. So we can treat ourselves like the person that treated us. So when we have feelings that come up, we can quickly dismiss those feelings. Or we can be scared to communicate those feelings to our partner because he or she certainly won't care about our feelings because the person that traumatized us certainly didn't care. So I'm just going to hold those feelings in. And they might come out through an explosion one day where I just can't take it anymore, and all of us just starts flowing out in this sort of rage at my partner, which doesn't help anything and is not healthy and certainly overwhelms my partner and causes us to get caught in these cycles. But in those moments, I am treating myself as the person that traumatized me treated me. So that's one way we can reenact them. Another way is we can treat our partner as if they were the person that hurt us. We can continue to do that in ways where we don't trust them. We don't believe them. When they say, hey, I would love to go to breakfast with you on Saturday morning because I want to watch the game in the afternoon, so that would be perfect timing. We don't hear that they would love to spend time with us. What we hear is that they'd rather watch the game. And so we can then pull back and think, well, they really don't want to spend time with us. They're just saying that. So, right, this mistrust can come up in the relationship, and we can treat our partner in ways like we were treated. And it can cause disconnections and insecurities in ourselves and in the relationship. And finally, we can project onto our partner that they're going to treat us in a way like our past person that traumatized us treated us. So again, with this example I've used, what we hone in on is that our partner would rather watch the game. So it must be that they're not really going to have a good time at breakfast. And if that's the case, if they're not going to be fun and relaxed and have a good time, then we just rather not go at all. So instead of trusting that they want to go and trying to work around something else that they want to do that day, instead we sabotage the breakfast. And so we start a fight and we just say, you know what, I don't want to go to breakfast with you if you're going to be this way. And so we project onto our partner that they're going to treat us in ways that would trigger our traumas again. So these are 3 different ways that we can reenact our trauma onto the relationship that are really important to be mindful of and to try to, again, tease apart how much of this is coming from me versus something that's really happening in the moment. That's not always easy to do, to be able to pinpoint, is this coming from me? Am I reenacting something here? Or is this something that's truly happening in the relationship? And the last thing I would say to help our partner understand how trauma impacts us and impacts the relationship is for them to realize it's just not always about them. The ways we're reacting in moments can be about us and things that we're dealing with, fighting with, struggling with internally, and it just may not always be about them. So we have to be able to learn and focus on what happens internally for us so that we can communicate that to our partners. Hey, I think this is something that's just going on with me right now. I'm not sure what it is, or I'm getting triggered here, or I'm feeling insecure, or this distrust came up for me, and I find that I'm treating you like I did my past partner. Please know this isn't about you in this moment. And that really helps them learn to be there for us when they don't feel like or are not confused because they think it's about them. So part of the work of trauma recovery is being able to communicate to our partners when we're dealing with something and it's just simply not about them. All right, well, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've thought about some ways that you can now communicate to your partner about how trauma has impacted you. If you don't have trauma, I really encourage getting your partner to listen to this episode or sharing it with them, or you guys can sit down together, because this may really be enlightening to them and they may be able to understand more of the interactions and how they play out in the relationship when you are triggered, or even when you're not, internally some of the things that you're struggling with and going through. So thank you very much for listening. As always, I really appreciate it, and I love the feedback you're giving me. Until then, we'll talk to you then. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.